We would never just like roll out drugs and see what happens. And after people die or are harmed or like incapacitated in some way, we say, oh, though, I guess that one didn't work, our bad. Um, we have to take this kind of disposition that we take toward other industries and products and think about them in the tech space.
Hello, everyone, and this is your host, Manasa. Welcome to another episode of Tech Breakdown. Today, we start with a story about a man named Alonzo Sawyer. The incident took place somewhere near the city of Baltimore in the United States. Someone assaulted a bus driver and stole their smartphone. Sawyer was picked up and put in jail for this. The police used facial recognition software to determine Sawyer was responsible and took the call to arrest him. Even though his wife provided alibi that he was with her at their house when the incident took place, she pointed out that her husband looked a lot taller and older in comparison to the person in the CCTV. Well, turns out she was right. Sawyer was released after 9 days in jail, kept locked up for a crime he did not commit. He joins Robert Williams, Michael Oliver, and Nigeria Parks, all arrested wrongfully for a crime they did not commit after being misidentified by facial recognition. Research studies that have tested various facial recognition tools continue to show how darker-skinned people are a lot more likely to be misclassified, especially darker-skinned females. Not by a bit, but by a long stretch. And yet here we are, treating technology as God when it is very much fallible. On the show today, I have someone who has been at the center of the conversation about algorithmic research. And not just that, she also happens to be someone who has laid some of the building blocks for the conversations we are having now. And thanks to researchers like her, we have the vocabulary to have these discussions. For her, it all started more than a decade ago when she Googled the words Black girls. We'll see what she found out and how that set the stage for her work, but it very much reveals how digital technologies are not neutral and that they can be tools of oppression. Today on the show, we have Dr. Safiya Noble. She is an Internet Studies scholar and professor of gender studies and African American studies at the University of California, Los Angeles. She is the founder of the Center for Race and Digital Justice. She's very famously known for her book, Algorithms of Oppression. She's also a research associate at the Oxford Internet Institute and was recognized as a MacArthur Foundation Fellow for her work on algorithmic discrimination. Welcome, Safiya. I just really want to put all of that to one side and simply say I have one of the queens of algorithmic research with me. What a pleasure to have you. And I've been looking forward to this conversation so much.
Me too. And I'm really just so grateful you're doing this series. It's so important. So thanks. I'm really honored to be on the show with you.
No, thank you. I think much of your work has been about driving the point that technology is not neutral, that it's not just code, it's more than that. You started with looking at search engines and then now also AI systems at large and how they perpetuate biases. You started seeing signs of this back in 2011, and it started with you Googling Black girls, right? In a recent interview, you described that experience as pulling one thread that's poking out of a sweater. And you say, if I could fix this, then I could move on to something else. But I started pulling it and the whole sweater unraveled. And here I am a decade later, and it's still kind of the same. Can you take us back to 2011? When you entered Black girls on Google, what did you find and how has it unraveled since then?
Yeah, it's really amazing and unfortunate that we're still having these conversations and that we haven't figured out how we'll solve for the kind of many crises that are happening, through network technologies like the internet. I will tell you that for me, it was kind of, in some ways, a simple story. I thought I was trying to work on a problem as a graduate student around the future of knowledge and what will happen when big, large-scale advertising platforms like Google and Yahoo and Bing come to completely supplant things like libraries and universities and other kinds of knowledge institutions. That's what I was thinking about. And I was thinking, here we have these big commercial advertising systems and people are using them, talking about them like they're the new public library. And of course, they're nothing but. And so I thought, well, I need to do a study to kind of demonstrate what the difference, what happens when you look for certain kinds of ideas in a knowledge space that's been managed and curated by knowledge professionals for thousands of years versus kind of a big ad tech platform. And so I started by using the census categories, the US census categories. I took every ethnicity and every gender on that because, of course, those categories kind of over-determine so much of our society. Those are the categories you're assigned at birth or when you start school or when you're in the hospital, all these kinds of things. And it started, that first search started with Black girls, and then it was Latina girls and Asian girls, and of course, women and men and boys. And overwhelmingly, Black girls, Asian girls, Latina girls, girls of color were misrepresented with pornography. And I don't mean just a little bit of pornography. I mean, you didn't have to add the word sex or porn. We were just synonymous with pornography. And so this really, of course, these sites were adult women, we assume. So you have kind of women being coded as girls. That's just kind of like a gender 101 challenge, let's say. But you also had this kind of callous way of crudely classifying people. And that was really what broken open the story to me of talking about what these systems are doing, because it was just such a grotesque example of what it means also for people who are minoritized in a society to also lose control over the way in which they're represented. Because even if all of the Black girls and Latina girls and Asian girls, even if, all the piggy banks were broken open to try to buy our way into better keywords and optimize those identities, we'd still never have enough money to compete with the porn industry. So it's also a question of power. Who has it? How can we influence these systems? And then what does it mean that they stand in as a proxy in so many spaces and places where they're legitimated as the knowledge portal? So there's not a parent or a teacher who probably hasn't told one of their students to just Google it. And this to me seemed like a really different kind of set of concerns that we should really pay attention to, especially for women and girls of color, but of course, more broadly in all societies.
Do you think has anything changed? Because I Googled Black girls the other day, and thankfully, no porn. But there were pictures of actual beautiful girls. There were sites taking me to girls in tech and sports, and it did certainly look far better than how it was in 2011. But might I just add, it's probably due to your work and the work of many other researchers harping about these issues that Google has managed to fine tune some of it. But as someone who's been looking at it for more than a decade, what has changed and what hasn't changed, in your opinion, in the space of algorithmic biases with regards to search engines?
Yeah, I think there's no question that tech companies, especially the large ones, they take the work of people like me. And, I like to joke that our work is like a big book of tickets, which in the tech industry, when you open a ticket, it means there's a problem that you're going to go research and eventually close out. And so my work was like a big book of tickets for whoever works on search at Google. And there's no doubt over time, they have definitely addressed every single example that's in my book. And of course, new problems that are coming up that also get traction or become public relations crises for them. So that happens quite often. And there are people who kind of monitor and just try to fix. But what they do when they fix is they kind of just downrank or push down the troubled information, let's say, or propaganda or misleading information. And we see this again and again because really it's very, very difficult for search platforms to fix these problems. In many cases, if you look at the kind of reports that come out of the sector, many of the software engineers who work on very large platforms, whether it's social media or search, they have no idea how to fix them. All they can kind of do is patch and band-aid. They can downrank things. They can have content moderators watching for those things. Certain kinds of things can get flagged and they pull them down. Now, this is very important to know too, because many people think that these systems are just pure free speech spaces. They really don't understand that there are armies of people around the world who work in call centers doing content moderation, constantly checking and scanning for problems that will become public relations crises or problems that will be uh, controversial or damaging to their clients. And of course, we want to remember we are not the clients to these companies, the large advertisers, people, the companies who spend millions of dollars a year, who don't want to see, for example, some white supremacist videos up next to their baby diaper commercials on YouTube, right? Or ads on YouTube. So there are people who constantly have to kind of, again, like pick at these things and try to, it's like whack-a-mole, trying to solve, but there isn't actually a technical solution to this. And this is, again, a reminder that these systems are human systems. They're made by humans, and the lack of knowledge that humans have, they are targeted toward an imagined audience. I mean, we know who the audience must have been that just wanted black girls in a pornographic way, right? So they imagine who the user is and they try to cater to that. And then there are, again, everyday people and people who are paid low wages to moderate and try to solve these problems. And to me, this is very different than the way most people think of these systems. What they think of is that these systems are superior to the way human beings think. They think that there's AI that is smarter, or that computer scientists who are smarter than them are curating information. They think that when they search for something and they get back the front page of results, if it confirms what they're looking for, they have more trust and more belief in the kind of veracity of these systems, and that means that people also relinquish a lot of trust into these systems. And to me, that is one of the things that I think is incredibly dangerous, and one of the reasons why I continue to study.
I also wonder, because sometimes when you're talking about these issues, you get told, well, humans are biased too. So, but I think the difference I find is, and some of this, the main point of concern is that even if humans are biased, we are, but there is a sense of understanding of that fallibility. And like you point out, with technology, that's not the case, because it looks like it's a lot more objective and scientific. And so we give it a lot more power. Would you agree with that kind of assessment?
I would, and I would just say that, a lot of people I think have taken my work, and this is a really good opportunity for me to kind of clarify this misunderstanding in the world around my work. People think that what I'm saying and arguing for is that the systems are biased, which I have to say, at the time 10 years ago that I was writing this and saying these systems are full of values, they are value laden. The values of the programmers are there, the values and priorities of the shareholders, and what the C-suite is catering to, state governments and what they want and how they influence companies. There's a lot of stakeholders and values and competing values at play. And of course, that also drills down to individuals who work in these companies. However, the point is not, and I should say 10 years ago to say that, I would get, well, I was derided, but let's put it that way, because people believed that these systems were just mathematical systems and that math could not be racist, math could not be sexist. And so it was impossible in some cases in the early days to have people understand, no, we can actually program things in ways that hold values, social values, political values, economic values. And that doing that, having that conversation 10 years ago was different than having it today. So 10 years ago, we were just trying to break through and say math used and deployed in these applied ways is a value laden project. Okay, so fast forward to today. The argument is not just simply that they hold values. The question now is what kind of values? And the whole book of Algorithms of Oppression was showing they are oppressive values in many different cases for different people. And of course, there's many, many examples in this book of how search can go wrong. I don't believe that there is any value-free, value-neutral space. What we see is the wrong values, in my opinion, that get propagated in the tech industry, which are about profit at all costs, no matter how perilous that is for the people from whom the profit is extracted. Sexism and racism, religious, sexual minority, ethnic kinds of discrimination that happen. We see these systems used in ways that make the vulnerable even more vulnerable. And this to me is actually the question, not do we make AI that is value free? It's what kind of values are in the AI, and does it expand the human capacity for our very best, or does it flatten us and deny our possibilities at its worst? And I fear that we're on the latter track rather than the former.
A lot of discussions about algorithms in the context of search engines is really, like you mentioned, was about how our information spaces are curated. And unlike, say, libraries, where there is a different logic to the curation, search engines and recommendation systems, as you've pointed out, are driven by advertising. So for those who say, I don't care, I go to the internet, I search and I pick out what I want to see and I like the ease of it. What would you tell them about why an information space and search space driven by advertising is not ideal?
Well, listen, I use search engines myself, but I'm extremely clear on what it is so that I don't use it for everything. And one of the things that I actually argue for in Algorithms of Oppression is that we need more than just one or two big monopoly systems. We need many, many different kinds of search engines, and they should be specialized so that when we are, let's say, looking for real evidence-based knowledge or studies or research, we have search engines that take us to the knowledge of scholars, that take us to government information and studies, and like really like knowledge that we can trust more than, let's say, a propaganda farm in some other part of the world that's just churning out nonsense and putting it up on the internet. But because it's so highly optimized, you're going to see it before you see something that's really reliable. What we need is to disambiguate knowledge from information, from kind of garbage and propaganda. And that is increasingly difficult to do. That is, to me, the bigger problem at hand.
I mean, I do want to come to AI now, and you were profiled in the Rolling Stone fairly recently. It was an important piece, but also a great cover. You're so used to seeing men in their standard suit pieces in all the business and tech magazines. I saw that cover, and something in me was like, yes. The piece itself talks about developments in AI and how the dangers and risks associated with artificial intelligence is something you and other researchers like Timnit Gebru and Joy Buolamwini have been saying for a while. And suddenly this summer, the tech bros come out and with their existential risk statement about AI, and everyone is in a frenzy. But that's such a manufactured conversation, though. Some of the real concerns and urgent concerns we should be having about AI, things you and Timnit and Joy have been talking about, are not on the agenda. And it is suddenly all killer robots and AI is going to wipe out humanity. So for people who are interested in a more nuanced conversation, What are the issues with, say, large language models like ChatGPT we should actually be looking at?
Uh, I have to say, this is one of the um, kind of conversations that just makes me put my head to the desk, because when I watch so many of the men who are kind of at the top of the you know, defining the discourse or the problems for governments and for society and for the industry. Many of them, and of course, there was this statement calling for a halt on the development of large language model technology, this kind of AI. And, a more cynical read that I do have is that, the industry wants a moratorium or a halt so that others can catch up. So, you want to remember that, Microsoft and OpenAI have gotten a big head start, in the eyes of their peers. And so the moratorium is also about kind of like, hold on, let us get our things together so we can exploit the market too. So we should be skeptical about what these moratoriums are when we hear them from certain people who have a financial interest in, again, catching up in the marketplace. I think there's also, in that group of people, this kind of doomsday forecasting and scenario building that, yes, the killer robots will get us, that AI is an existential threat to humanity, that it can become sentient. Some think it already is. All of these things have really been disproven by scholars like Timnit Gebru and Emily Bender, who in their Margaret Mitchell, in this amazing paper that they wrote, that's kind of colloquially called the stochastic parrot paper. They really help us understand that all these big language models are doing is just pattern matching. They're pattern matching words. Okay, so, but they're doing it on a huge corpus of text. So pattern matching words is not the same thing as having true clarity and discernment. Again, as I mentioned in the previous example, you can pattern match with a lot of terrible propaganda and information too. So that's one big challenge here. And when you look at the new studies that are coming out, looking at things like ChatGPT, more than half of the citations or resources or recommendations that come back often are patently false. And the only way that we know this, and I know this because the week that ChatGPT opened up to the public, I was asking it a lot of things. I was asking it to give me citations around a lot of things that I'm an expert on. And I was just dumbfounded at how much of it was just absolutely fabricated and made up. These were not real citations. These are not real. It might be a real journal, but a fake name of an article, not the real people. So that to me is very dangerous. If you don't care about it for you, imagine all the people who are providing services for you. If you need a doctor or a lawyer or any kind of professional service, feels dangerous to me. So there's kind of these issues. There's also, I think, the thing that these women scholars helped us understand, which is the incredible energy drain that large language models use. I mean, it is incomprehensible how just running one large language AI model for 24 hours I was just reading this a few days ago, is equivalent to 668,000 tons of carbon into the atmosphere, or it's like 62 cars running 24/7 for a year. So that's just one model running one day. To me, these are the more urgent, everyday kinds of concerns we should have about AI. It's not the future 1,000 years from now. It's right now. What do we do to ensure we have a planet, we have a future of humanity? Are we writing policies that consider both the earth and future generations as stakeholders in these projects, as they're doing in places like New Zealand.
Other than large language models, obviously we know AI is being used in it for other purposes, like I signposted in my introduction, like facial recognition. Maybe we could use that also as an example. I know that you've been looking and you've looked at use of AI in policing in the United States. Could we talk about some of those risks, sort of AI in everyday life?
Yeah, I mean, I live in Los Angeles and I work at UCLA, big university here. And UCLA is a place where things like predictive policing were invented, by my colleagues. In predictive policing, traditional predictive policing, you use the data from where former arrests have been made to help you determine where crime is likely to happen in the future. Well, if you're from any low income neighborhood in any big city, you know that the police are more likely to be deployed in your neighborhood, and more arrests will happen just by virtue of the fact that more police are deployed there. What you know is that you have kind of this kind of, you know, logic that where we have a lot of data of over policing, we are of course going to predict police back into those neighborhoods, more police back. So this is just kind of like a fallacy in the logic. Now you have policing that's been combined, predictive policing technologies that have been combined. This just was announced 2 weeks ago with Predpol merging with ShotSpotter, which is again an auditory kind of driven AI system that listens for allegedly listens for gunshots and then deploys police to places where there are gunshots. So the level of surveillance now that is required in order for these kinds of technologies to work means you have to have more sensors, more network sensors all over the city, especially in places where you allegedly believe that there will be more violence, more cameras, more facial recognition, kind of more of the things that are, as you opened up your show talking about, are implicated in denying people just their basic fundamental civil rights and human rights. So to me, these are, of course, we know from people who study even police cameras, and here's one of my colleagues, Dr. Stacy Wood at UCLA, who also shows that these have been huge money grabs for tech companies to go in and sell police cameras, body cameras, all these different kinds of technologies to police departments. This is just a drain directly out of the city coffers of any municipal government. It's just a money grab. Many times those cameras are, as we know, turned off, not working properly. They're certainly never faced at the police themselves. They're faced at communities. So there's a lot of problems with these kinds of systems, the racist ways in which and classist ways in which they're deployed.
Let's move to the solutions. And
Okay.
in an NPR interview, you said, I think, they shouldn't be allowed into the marketplace to propagate harm. And then we find out after the fact that they are dangerous and we have to do work of trying to recall them. That would be a powerful start. So, I mean, this is the kind of frustration for anyone working in tech policy, really, isn't it? The culture of sort of release first and experiment on the population, and then everyone starts wondering about what the harms are. What are your sort of hopes in terms of regulation and legislative frameworks with regards to some of the issues we've outlined today?
I do feel hopeful, even with kind of the terribleness. And part of the reason that I feel hopeful is because, I'm a Black American and I understand these very long histories of oppression of Black people in the Americas, more broadly, and that change does happen. And we can, in fact, experience greater freedoms than a generation ago or a generation or two before that. So I come from a people that is hopeful. because we have um, struggled against very difficult things, from enslavement to denial of civil rights, Jim Crow segregation. I mean, all of these kinds of very disheartening and defeating um, social practices. So I feel hopeful because I know that it's the imagination that we hold about a more free future that helps us realize it. And I do have that. I mean, I will say that in 10 years, we have had a total paradigm shift about the way we look at technology. When I started studying technology, I mean, no one believed that technology could discriminate. It was so hard. I'm not kidding you. It was so difficult to have anyone understand this. And now, of course, we have thousands and thousands of researchers around the world who are doing very granular investigations of discriminatory technology. And that is phenomenal because we have more evidence than ever. And we have a paradigm shift. There's no state government around the world now that would deny that technologies can be harmful. I think we have another decade before us that where we need to help decision makers understand that we would never just like roll out drugs and see what happens, and after people die or are harmed or like incapacitated in some way, we say, oh well, I guess that one didn't work, our bad. um, we have to take this kind of disposition toward that we take toward other industries and products and think about them in the tech space. I mean, the tech sector has really powerfully for 50 years narrated itself as just simply being a tool, as being agnostic, as being value free, and put the onus back on the public when the public is harmed and said, well, it's your fault that you didn't use it right. But I think now um, that argument does not hold, and people aren't buying it anymore. It can't just be one-sided, where all the burden of the pain of the flaws and the mistreatment from these systems happens to the public. And, the business leaders just shrug their shoulders and say, well, I guess it was the algorithm. I mean, that's just unacceptable now. And I think for me, the next decade is about helping the public both understand what's lost from these systems by our over reliance on them, but also thinking about what accountability can look like.
I mean, in terms of shifting the blame, I think one of the conversations we see that most is now when it comes to harms to young people with regards to social media and technology. And this,
Yeah.
I know, has been a conversation in the US of late about how much of that responsibility should go on to parents and young people themselves versus the companies taking up some more responsibility. I know you are a parent, and I've watched several videos where you've been at speaking engagements where you talk about your kids and sort of cultivating a certain environment where they're more critical of the devices and ask questions about their relationship with technology. So I know you care deeply about the issue. What do you think are the greatest challenges when it comes to youth safety and online harms?
Well, I have a tremendous amount of compassion for people and the way in which these products, especially social media products, are made to be addictive for the whole the public, not just for kids, but of course, especially for kids whose frontal lobe is not fully developed yet, who are um, also just trying to socially integrate. And social media is a part of that for so many people. And I don't think that you criminalize people who are any kind of addict or who are in any way forced into these systems and then turned around and punished. I mean, every school requires at least, I can't think of very many schools right now in the US that aren't having some type of technological touch point for kids. I guess maybe at homeschooling you might not be. But the public has been sold computers and all kinds of classroom management kinds of systems And so kids are, in one context told, use the computer. It's going to make you smarter. It's going to help you get into college. And then they're told, you're a terrible, person. Your parents should go to jail because you're on Facebook too much, or on, well, the kids aren't on Facebook anymore. You're on Snapchat, or, you're on TikTok too much. Whole notion of like criminalizing our engagements. It's almost to me like saying, well, we're going to put you in jail because you drink poisoned water.
Mm.
It's a handful of people who are responsible for a poisoned information and media environment. And you can't hold the person accountable who's at the very end holding a device responsible. So, legislation right now that is calling for these kinds of like, you know, parental consent, and parents could, be incarcerated or harmed. Well, we know those kinds of policies always get deployed again on poor people, disproportionately on people of color. LGBTQ and sexual minorities are going to be targeted by this. We also know sex workers, all kinds of people are going to be the target, because, and part of the reason we know is because when we look at the behavior of Silicon Valley elites or Silicon Corridor elites around the world, they do things like have their nannies keep their kids off social media. They have agreements and NDAs with their nannies that their kids can't touch, or no photos of them can go on the internet, or no engagements. And they police their children very, very hard to make sure that their kids aren't ensnared and caught up in these systems that they would turn around and give to our families.
Mm.
So these are the things that I think we have to look at what they do, not what they say. And we have to be very careful about legislation that further victimizes people who might already be victimized by these different kinds of technologies. Even if you don't care about people who are minoritized in your country or in your community, even if you don't care, I will tell you there's so much snake oil out here that's targeted at everyone. The one thing that was so shocking to me during the Trump administration in the United States was the White House was looking at investing in software that would predict who the next mass shooter would be in the US. Now, I'll tell you what, if you look at the statistics on who mass shooters are, they're white men. So even if you don't care about all the rest of us, do you want yourselves and your sons in those kinds of databases being predicted for these kinds of mass crimes? So this faulty logic that's underneath so much of this snake oil and predictive technology is dangerous for everyone. And I'm really committed that we understand those dangers and that we hold the right people responsible.
Thank you, Safiya. I will end there. And it's you always speak very brilliantly and very put it very beautifully. And thank you very much for speaking with me today.
It's so great to meet you and to talk to you. And thank you so much for your work. And it was my pleasure to be here.
My pleasure. Thank you.